Welcome, everyone, to the Mind Viking. I am your host, Eric Engberg. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button below. And while you're at it, please click on the little bell icon so you're notified anytime a new episode goes live. In this episode, I have as my guest, film writer and producer, Mr. James Rozelle. James and his production group, Dusty Mesa Productions, recently released a riveting and thought-provoking short film called The Prisoner's Song. The film, about an ex-convict who struggles to find his place back into society after surviving the traumas of prison, was awarded the highly coveted Vimeo Staff Pick Award. In this episode, James and I will discuss certain criminal laws that are inherently flawed and should be changed, the societal consequences of a criminal system that is designed to punish offenders rather than rehabilitate them, and our government's apparent history of subjugating targeted groups of society by implementing harsher sentencing laws for the possession of certain illegal drugs. James, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Doing pretty good, brother. How you doing?
Good, man. I'm doing good.
All right.
Yeah, I woke up breathing this morning, man. So anytime that happens, that's a good day, man.
It's all you can ask for, right?
Yeah.
The minimum.
Yeah. All right, man. Hey, I just want to dive in. So if that's good with you.
Rock and roll, brother.
Yeah, let's do it, man. So there seems to be a real appetite right now for films that bring awareness or that uncover the unfairness and injustices of our world. I think a lot of people have become woke as a result of the attention surrounding important social and racial movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and then, of course, equal rights for the LGBTQ community. People want to learn more and educate themselves so they can be part of some level of a solution and to help right some of the wrongs of the world. And I see The Prisoner's Song as one of these types of films. So James, in your words, can you share with us why this film and why now?
Really, it all just kind of traces back to, one kind of a phone call by happenstance, not necessarily happenstance, but my partner, Bilal Haider, who's also a co-owner of Dusty Mesa Productions, he had called me when we had some downtime in between projects with a concept. And the concept was actually, it was pretty simple. It was the idea of taking 2 days in the life of a prisoner, one near the beginning of their stint in prison and a day near soon after their release, and intercutting those days together just to kind of juxtaposition as well as show how similar life can be, how different and similar life can be inside and outside of prison, and how hard it can be to adjust. I was actually really taken aback that he approached me with this because I hadn't worked with him in a writing and creative capacity yet. But I mean, it immediately struck me because for me, prison reform and criminal justice reform has always been something that I'm passionate about. My family has had, basically everyone around me has been to jail, county for a long time, or state and federal prison. So it's something that's impacted my life in a significant way at every stage of it. And, something I was really excited to get involved in. And we just kind of jumped right in. Really, we wanted to tell a story that I thought would provoke kind of people's more dormant side of outrage almost toward the system, where we all we live our daily lives, we try to be as happy as we can, but somewhere deep inside we see the injustices around us, and they sicken us or they upset us, subconsciously, but we try not to pay too much mind to it, though we can get through our day. If we really stopped at every injustice we saw and got sick to our stomach as we should. We literally couldn't function, right? If you walked down the street and every time you saw a homeless man, it made you physically upset, you wouldn't be able to get through, walk down the street in Houston, or LA or New York. So, we always kind of suppressed these things. And the idea was to make was to use this film as a way to kind of pull those deep rooted feelings out and make people feel like they should about the system and feel like they should about the way that it kind of warps people. So that was just the idea going in, and we worked really hard. There was no idea that this was going to turn into some kind of social movement, or we were going to, even end up as a Vimeo Staff Pick selection, which is, is an honor, is one of the greatest honors a short film maker can get in this industry.
Yeah.
We just hope that we would touch whoever happened to watch it would be touched, but it happened by happenstance. Some very tragic things have happened lately in this country, and not lately, they've been going on for a long time, but awareness has been drawn to them lately, and that's police brutality toward minorities, African Americans, and Hispanics specifically.
Yeah.
And it just happened to coincide right as our film was picking up steam and getting accepted into some film festivals. And I guess that, like you said, the appetite surely, the appetite grew for content along these lines. And so it's just kind of, I wouldn't call it lucky, because things like this happening in society, it's an absolute misfortune. So I wouldn't call us lucky that we happened to have made this film at the time when Black people are being murdered by the police. That isn't luck, but it has coincided in a significant way, and hopefully our film can touch as many people as possible as a result.
Yeah, well, it definitely touched me. I watched the whole thing. And it was posted by a mutual acquaintance of ours, Lee Rothenflew, who, I believe did some of the editing on the film, and he and I are friends on Facebook. And so he posted it, and I was just gonna click on it and, maybe watch it for, a couple minutes. But I ended up watching the entire thing, and it absolutely provoked those feelings, because, you guys do such an amazing job of, bringing to life the trauma, that the incarcerated face in prison. And then, like you described, he wakes up in prison, and then as a free man, he wakes up, and then throughout the day, and really his life didn't get any better. He was still suffering, and we're going to take a kind of a deeper dive here in a bit, why that is. But like you touched on, James, you have a family history of incarceration. Both parents are felons. I believe your stepbrother also served time in prison.
And biological older brother as well. He just got out
did he?
A year and a half ago, yeah. Or no, last year. Not even a year yet. August last year, I think.
Okay.
He just got done doing 2 years.
Gotcha. The story that you shared with me about your stepbrother kind of really touched a nerve, and I'll give a quick summary, and then I'll let you explain the rest of the story here. So he accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to, I believe, around 10 years, which meant that he could have served as little as 2 to 3 years of the total sentence. But something happened on the day that he was supposed to report to jail that effectively quadrupled his sentence. So can you share with us what happened?
Sure. My stepbrother, I'll leave his name out just
sure, yeah,
in case he might not appreciate it. I haven't really spoken to him, so.
Yeah.
But my stepbrother, he wasn't living his life right. That's for sure. He wasn't living his life right. He was actually on his either 5th or 6th DWI charge in the state of Texas. And that's they have basically a no tolerance policy for that here. You know, they're really trying to lock you up and throw away the key at that point. If you can't stop getting behind the wheel of a vehicle intoxicated, they just won't put you away, which I can understand. I don't actually necessarily see that as wrong. I mean, you can only do so much for somebody, give them so many opportunities. But again, I don't think our system is actually, rehabilitating people in a way that is preventing these things. But either way, that's neither here nor there. He was making some poor choices, and on his 5th DWI, I want to say it's 5th, it might be 6th, but I'll go with 5th for now. On his 5th DWI, he had a lengthy court trial process, and he ended up getting sentenced to about 10 years in prison. His lawyers were able to arrange a deal where he would have some time to get his affairs in order after sentencing, and he would report to jail, which is something that it doesn't seem like is too uncommon of a thing when requested or needed for whatever reason. And on the day that he was supposed to report to jail, he actually ended up in the hospital. Now, I wasn't there to witness it. Obviously, people have their snide remarks in the family and things like that. But the way that it's told is that he was, essentially playing hooky from going to prison, okay, right? Trying to buy himself another 30 days or something by missing his, the date he's supposed to report to jail. Well, the issue is the judge didn't take too kindly to that. Yeah. He thought that my stepbrother was playing hooky, and as a result decided to throw out his the plea deal that he'd agreed to, and ended up sentencing him to 20 years in prison, which is significant. That's double the actual time, and he actually ended up as a result doing 9.5 years. I want to say it might actually be a full 10, but I want to say it's a little short, 9.5 years instead of the 3 or so that he would have ended up doing with good behavior if he had shown up. Now, of course we can all say, well, maybe he shouldn't have played hooky on the day he was supposed to go to jail. But who's to say that he was exactly, right? The judge. Sure, in my family, that's the rumor, right? That's the saying, is that he was playing hooky or whatever, trying to, buy himself a little more time. But I don't see how the system is in any position, the criminal justice system is in any position to say that he didn't have a medical emergency. I mean, what if he actually did have a medical, what if he literally physically couldn't go to jail, right? I mean, if you can't get in a car and go because you have a medical emergency, I mean, it is highly coincidental, sure, but should it cost you, quadruple your sentence, your effective sentence, or double your actual sentence? Should it cost you 10 years of your life?
Yeah.
And I don't feel like in my opinion, there's almost no way that any real due diligence was done to discern the legitimacy of this medical, this medical issue. I mean, I'm sure they didn't, subpoena nurses and stuff like that to come and testify on whether or not, he had a real medical problem. And so things like that just seem like it's an overreach of the system, right? You've come up with a deal. Yes, he may have played hooky, but prove it, right? Like, I feel like the burden proof's on the system in that case to prove that my stepbrother didn't have a real medical emergency. Yeah. And I don't think they did.
Yeah, that is, that's a little scary, man, It is. And I know you're a little vague, on all the details. But I'm curious if, the judge just, he didn't show up that second, bam.
It was essentially that day or the next day. It was that week, during that business week, that we found out he was getting sentenced to a full 20 years. Yeah. So, I mean, and essentially at any point in time, at least in the state of Texas, the judge has the power to toss out any plea deal. The judge doesn't have to accept a plea deal that prosecutors and defendants an agreement that prosecutors and defendants come to. In fact, whenever you do accept a plea deal, in this state at least, you're essentially throwing yourself to the mercy of the court. You're saying, yes, we've, shook hands, we made a deal, but at the end of the day, you're at the mercy of the judge. And the judge can literally rip the paper up and give you whatever he wants. You're literally offering yourself to him. You're pleading guilty, or whatever your plea deal is, usually guilty. And since you're pleading guilty, you're now guilty. And the judge, having foregone your right to trial by jury in this scenario, the judge now has the right to sentence you however he feels appropriate. And of course, a lot of times they take the suggestion of the prosecution, because if you threw out every deal and threw the book at everybody, no one would make a deal, right?
Yeah.
But but occasionally you end up in situations like this where the judge essentially can tell you to shove it and hit you with the whole entire book. So and that's kind of terrifying. It's I feel like if you come to a deal with the prosecutors who are the ones pursuing the charges against you, that should be immutable from outside influence, be it judges or whatever.
I wonder though if part of the terms were, hey, you got to show up on this day at this time. He didn't show up, so the judge said, hey, deal's off. What I would be curious to find out is, hey, like you said, what due diligence did the judge do, or his clerk or his office?
Sure, obviously not the actual judge, but
yeah, to verify, hey man, the guy was in jail. The guy was in the hospital for a legitimate reason. Because like you said.
But who's to say, right?
Yeah.
Who's to say? Because again, medical records, those are private and confidential.
That's
There's
true.
no court in the world that can make me produce my medical records. That's 100% my right to privacy, and no court has any legitimate access to it, in this country at least. So who's to say? I feel like the amount of proof needed should stop at, was he in the emergency room, right? And everything outside of that is just purely opinion and intuition based decision making. There's no factual evidence to be gathered. To my knowledge, he didn't submit medical documentation to the court, and I don't think that he's obligated to. I think that's his right. Yeah. But of course, I can see the issue with that. Well, then everyone's going to get an upset stomach whenever they have to go to jail. Well, then maybe people shouldn't. Maybe they need to design the system differently, right? Where they design this aspect of the system differently, where there isn't that loophole. Instead of, sorry, you had a real medical emergency, now your whole life's ruined. Bing, bing, case closed. Lock them up, throw away the key. That sickens me almost. Yeah. The idea that somebody who might actually have a medical issue could lose a decade of their life or more.
Right.
As a result of bad luck, essentially. I don't think any system dealing in human lives should operate on such subjectiveness.
Yeah, and to go from potentially 2 to 3 to automatically 10 years, that's got to be worth some level of clarification or due diligence or something, because that's a significant increase in time served. Hey man, I want to move on to talk about what life can be like for felons once they're released. And did a little research, and here are some of the freedoms that felons can lose once they're released. And this depends, on the severity of the crime, what type of offense it was. And then I think it also varies state to state, but this is a pretty good general list. So when you're released, you're a felon. You can lose the right to travel abroad.
That's
the
true.
right to vote, the right to sit on a jury, the rights to your children, the rights to certain types of housing, and then the rights to certain types of employment. So, what do you think, man? Do you think that's fair?
Hell no, man. Are you kidding me? Come on, brother.
Yeah.
I mean, being a felon is such a broad term, right? It's not like these are even really sanctioned out in any, or sectioned out in any real logical way. It's just a blanket term almost that can describe any number of violent or non-violent crimes, drug-related, financial-related, right? And I think that people who do commit certain crimes, crimes of a certain nature, they do warrant having some restrictions on their freedoms. If that's somebody who maybe preys on as a sexual predator to children, right? We have to do our due diligence as a society to ensure that we protect children from people with a history of that behavior. I understand that. I agree with that. So restricting their freedoms in certain ways, certain reasonable, non-cruel ways, that makes sense to me. But then if you're talking about somebody who's a drug dealer, might have dealt a felony and might have had a felony amount of marijuana, or did you know any possession of any amount of LSD is a felony in this country?
Really?
Any amount of LSD, yeah, it's a Schedule 1 narcotic. Any amount of LSD is just a straight felony. Molly, things like that, these party drugs that are, I wouldn't say harmless. I mean, sure, people end up being harmed on them, but not any more than alcohol or anything else. I mean, these are recreational. They're not really the subject of a national health crisis. We're not talking about heroin here, which I have my own opinions about even. The idea that we're going to classify all these people together with murderers and rapists and money launderers and embezzlers, it's laughable. I mean, are you really telling me that the same country that created the bureaucratic nightmare that is the IRS can't distinguish between different types of felons? That's a joke. That's literally the end of it. I just told a joke.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy. It almost doesn't make sense. It's lazy, and it just seems as a way. You have to start looking at it as what is the underlying goal? What is trying to be accomplished when you do something like that, right? Because no thinking person, no thinking person could ever come to the assumption that that all those different types of felon types I mentioned are equivalent, right? Yeah. They're not. Nobody thinks that somebody who had a couple pounds of weed I was dealing a lot of weed, to be honest, is the same as a murderer, or even as somebody who ran a Ponzi scheme. They're obviously different, and inherently people who have committed these crimes come with a different set of risk, right? As people, right? They have a history, but it's separate. And the idea that we classify them all together, you have to look kind of underneath it all, right? And say, what is maybe the motive that's going on here, right? Yeah. And if you look at the origins of these things, you start to really see, like especially the war on drugs and the prohibition of marijuana specifically. You see that there's just tons of documentation that make the intention obvious. The intention becomes obvious, where these things are being held to the same weight as these people who deal drugs, etc., are being held to the same weight and same standard as murderers, as far as their restriction of their rights, etc., and rapists, because these laws are created to target minorities. Marijuana was outlawed. The prohibition of marijuana began as a way to discriminate against Mexicans and African Americans. Literally memos from I want to say the director of the CIA. Anyway, there's multiple memos you can look up where people in the government during basically the creation of the marijuana prohibition had correspondence between each other that talked about the intention of, if we make marijuana illegal, then we can demonize the hippies and the Mexicans and the blacks, etc. And it's in black and white. It's literally declassified documents, not WikiLeaks.
What do you think we would need to search to find?
We need a Jamie in here, man. Is what we Hey, Jamie, pull that up real quick, man.
Oh, right. Yeah. From Rogan, huh?
Yeah. Hey, Jamie, pull that up real quick, man.
Right. Yeah. I'm not yet to that level, man.
All right. I have the quote for you. John Ehrlichman, I don't know if I'm saying that right, who was the White House Domestic Affairs Advisor between 1969 and 1973, testified this to Congress. He said, and I quote, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities and we could arrest their leaders."
Wow.
Hold on. "Raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news." Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. White House Domestic Affairs Advisor between 1969 and 1973 in testimony to Congress in 2016.
Yeah. So they criminalize these.
It was intentional. Yeah, it was intentional. Yeah. They said, like you said, they couldn't make it illegal to be black or against the war.
Yeah.
So they made the things that the people who were those things, the things that they did, illegal. Okay. And they criminalized their behavior. That way they could essentially subject them to abuse systematically.
Yeah. And
it never ended. We're here today where you can, if you're running a totally legal dispensary in any state in this country, the DEA can absolutely come and bust it up, raid you, and charge you with a felony.
Really?
Nothing. Yeah, the federal law, marijuana is illegal federally. Federal law does trump state law in this country. Yeah. So, and it happens all the time. DEA raids.
Marijuana is not legal federally.
No, it's definitely not at all. Okay. Yeah. It's illegal. And you can look up every day for the next, for the rest of this year, see how often, if you just Google it, see how often a new story comes out of the DEA doing another drug raid on a legal dispensary, with the justification that federal law, trumps over state law. And it's almost asinine. It's like, what is being accomplished, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what are you going to raid every dispensary? Obviously not. But instead of resigning to the fact that you've lost this culture war against marijuana, you've lost the power to subjugate minorities to abuse on a regular basis because of their association with drugs, with marijuana. And instead of just accepting that and moving on, they can't possibly let it go. So they continue to subject these communities to abuse systematically by just raiding the totally legal establishments on a state level that dispense these things. It's sickening.
Yeah, and just to clarify, so obviously drugs don't discriminate. So sure. Everybody who's prone to take drugs, black, white, whatever, is going to take them. But I think what you're saying is that there's maybe a greater concentration of within minority populations of certain drugs that race consumes, and so the government kind of looked and said, okay, here's what they like. If we criminalize these drugs, then we can arrest them, and especially around that time in the 60s and 60s, 70s, silence their voice. They can't be protesting if they're in prison. They can't be quote unquote causing us trouble if they're behind bars, right? Is that kind of the
Well,
bit?
it actually is more nefarious than you could possibly imagine. When I connect these dots for you, I have a feeling that your mind will be blown, and so will anyone who hasn't realized this yet. The biggest political lie ever told was that Reagan started the war on drugs. The actual person who started the war on drugs was Richard Nixon. It's important that this lie is in place for, as far as the way that we perceive it. It's not a well-hidden lie. I mean, Nixon literally, he started the severe punishments and criminalization of marijuana and many other drugs, which were not illegal before the 1970s and the mid-1960s.
Yeah.
Yes, Reagan coined the term, the war on drugs. He made it popular, made all the PSAs, right? Nancy Reagan went on TV and did the whole thing. But it was began by Richard Nixon. And this is a really important detail to not overlook historically, because it puts into context how nefarious this really is, right? So if you have, just like his White House domestic affairs advisor testified to Congress in 2016, like I read to you earlier, if your intention, if you have these problematic groups of hippies and blacks that are disrupting society in a way that troubles you, right? Whether it be anti-war or whatever, there's a solution that you can that they decided to implement, which was not just to throw them in jail for right now, but to make them felons, so they can't vote ever for 10, 20 years. You take away their agency and their ability to influence the country and the way it's governed for decades.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when you connect the dot on it and you realize, oh, that is absolutely diabolical. They said, hey, wait, I just brainstormed an idea. Not only can we just throw these hippies in jail, we can make them felons. And that is the underlying reason why we treat murderers and drug dealers the same. And not only drug dealers, but drug users, depending on what kind of drug, is a felony possession. And it's not because the government's too stupid to discern the difference. It's because if you can take marginalized communities and inject them with heavy policing, right? Then you can catch them with drugs, small or medium, large amounts, take away their right to vote and make changes to this country for decades. And I want to say it's something like, depending on what state you're in, 20 years, 10 to 20 years before you can vote again. It's just absolutely diabolical. It is.
Yeah, that is mind blowing, man. Especially here, last 6 months or so, I've been watching all these movies. 13th Amendment touches on that. So it doesn't surprise me. But yeah, I had not yet connected those dots, but it does make sense. Hey, so one travesty of justice that I was only vaguely familiar with before you encouraged me to do some research on it was the case of the Central Park Five. 5 minority boys, 4 black, 1 Latino, and they were boys, ranging in age from 14 to 16. They were wrongfully convicted of the brutal beating and rape of a white female jogger. The boys were brought in. They were interrogated, most without their parents, and none of them with an attorney present. And these detectives beat them down physically and emotionally until, and any child would do this until they just finally gave in. I mean, they gave in. They knew what the detectives wanted, and they confessed. And then once they had legal representation, they retracted their confession. And even though there was 0 DNA evidence to connect any of these boys to the woman's rape, they were convicted and sent to prison. So, man, these boys didn't do it. No DNA evidence to connect them to the rape. Why do you think they were still convicted?
Well, this was essentially what you could call the modern lynching, in my opinion.
Okay.
If I will be so bold as to say it. This is the modern, you can't, I mean, the good old days are gone. You can't go take a boy and tie him up with a rope from a tree. So what do? You know what I mean? You get that initial mob justice. You want to get that good feeling, that good rush. You caught the bad guy, right? I'm sure that at some point near the beginning, they were convinced they had the right couple of black kids. You know what I mean? It all fit, all the dots fit. But then they didn't, right? And then suddenly, you know, some in the news, some descriptions of the attackers started to come out. These things didn't fit, the narrative didn't fit. And so not only did they just arrest these kids who they just absolutely had the wrong people totally, and then beat them down, which is terrible, but none of that's going to shock your audience, right? And we're all familiar with the fact that black people get beat up by the police. We see it. We don't need to go back to 1980 or 1990 to see that, right? We can see that on the news today. Yeah. But what will really sicken you is that once it started to come out in the news, the descriptions didn't really match, right? Some descriptions of the assailants, the way that the victim had described, but some witnesses had described them, weren't matching these kids. Yeah. You know, suddenly a magical thing happened. The names of the suspects, these minors, they were all minors, started to get released into the press, which is a crime. Normal police procedures in the United States, in every state basically, in New York City especially, stipulate that the names of criminal suspects under the age of 16 were to be withheld from the media and public. This is any case, that's just how it is. Yeah. Somehow, every single one of these kids' names ended up in the newspaper, at corresponding exactly with the time that these other stories had popped up about kind of a mismatch, right? Like, that didn't sound like these kids actually. The description doesn't fit, and then they start leaking the names of the kids, and they start doing these media attacks. So the police, once they even realized there was a chance they could be wrong, they couldn't afford the egg on the face, right? God forbid that somebody get fired for arresting and whooping these minors. What do? They decide to try them in the court of public opinion. Yeah. So they put their names out there. Now you don't just have 5 kids who may not match the appearance of the attackers, blah, 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 right? You have names and faces to point at and to demonize, right? Yeah. And actually, a lot of people don't know this, but Donald Trump took an ad out in the paper even after the kids were exonerated, still in New York City, he took an ad out in the paper that attacking these kids, really? Saying that they were actually rapists and that the exoneration was incorrect.
Really?
Yeah, it's insane.
So the crime happened in '89. Do you remember when they were exonerated? And it was.
I know that the trials weren't actually finished up completely until the 90s, 91 or something like that.
Yeah.
But I want to say some of them were released in the late 90s, like 97. And then I think their convictions were vacated in 2001 or 2002 on DNA evidence. But 2 of them had already been released at this point. Yeah, in 1997, 2 of them were released, I want to say.
Okay. So for our audience, they can actually, and this is something that I watched on Netflix. They've got a 4-part miniseries that was great. It was hard to watch, but wanted to hear the story. It's called When They See Us. It's directed by Ava DuVernay, who also directed 13th Amendment. Again, another movie I would highly recommend anyone watch. and it does an amazing job of, like you did, James, connecting the dots that, didn't even know
It's important,
existed.
right, that we look kind of at
Yeah.
the big picture when we observe our society. We have to
Yeah.
be objective, I feel like.
Yep. Yep.
I actually want to let me correct something earlier.
Okay.
I'm sorry. The thing with the Donald Trump newspaper, I actually had that wrong. I was looking at it right here. He actually took out an ad in 1989 after the kids were arrested that said, the title of it in big black bold letters is "Bring Back the Death Penalty." And
Yeah.
it's a one page, he took out a whole page, basically, here's a quote from it. Mayor Koch has stated that hate and rancor should be removed from our hearts. I do not think so. I want to hate these muggers and murderers. They should be forced to suffer. Yes, Mayor Koch. I guess I'm saying that right. I want to hate these murderers, and I always will. How can our great society tolerate the continued brutalization of its citizens by crazed misfits? Criminals must be told that their civil liberties end when an attack on our safety begins. I mean, is it just me, or is the way that reads almost like he's not trying to say muggers and misfits? Like he's trying to say this other word.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, but
Yeah.
he can't. I mean, I can almost feel it rolling off of his tongue, and it makes me sick because this, number one, he was wrong. He was just objectively wrong. These kids didn't even commit this crime. But if it was up to him, if he was in charge, this is the terrifying part, he would have killed them. He would have actually gave them the death penalty.
Yeah.
If it was up to him, he literally took out a whole page in the Daily News, front page,
Yeah.
to advocate for murdering these kids, these minors.
Yeah.
And they weren't even the people who did it. They were totally exonerated. Doesn't that terrify you that somebody with such impulse like that is actually running our country today? And not to get political about it, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not somebody who is either on this side or that side. I'm neither left nor right. I consider myself a slave only to reason and logic and things that make sense. But that's kind of scary. Like, if he literally writes a whole page about it, if it was up to me, I'd kill all 5 of these kids. They're misfits and they're a plague on our society. And kind of is up to him now.
Yeah.
He's the commander in chief, and that's that kind of brash decision making. That's concerning.
Yeah,
it's concerning.
And actually, in one of the scenes of 13th Amendment, there is a clip of Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned the article, and then there was an interview or news clip where, he was pretty pissed off and saying some pretty incendiary type language towards these boys who were innocent. Yeah. So that's a sad thing about that. So Ava DuVernay directed 13th Amendment. She was quoted as saying that my goal was to humanize boys and now men who are widely regarded as criminals. So James, in some way, was this kind of the intention or purpose behind the Prisoner's Song to humanize the incarcerated in hopes that society might see them a little differently and maybe sympathize with their situation a little more?
To an extent, yes, but it's also an abstract on the system as a whole, not just the individuals who are victims of it, which is a very key central part. It is a very key and central part of our project, but it's, like I said, an abstract of the faults of the system as a whole and in its entirety. I hope that people who watch it and are moved by it don't stop at, oh, this is really bad for people, and they look deeply into it and really begin to understand how objectively, and I say objectively, cruel and inefficient our justice system is when you boil it down. I hope that this prisoner song is a rabbit hole, if you will, for people to get lost in, and to really learn the ins and outs of the system that their country runs, which houses more prisoners than any other place in the entire world. More prisoners than any countries ever held in history.
Yeah.
And that is staggering.
Yeah, you send me those stats on that, and yeah, that was pretty eye-opening. No, man, good segue into this next section I wanted to rack your brain on. So the last time that we spoke, you mentioned that you would like to see a paradigm shift happen for the entire criminal system, which would include the removal of the federal murder law, the removal of mandatory minimums, and and this is kind of a controversial one, but I'm glad you're talking about it, man. I really am. The full decriminalization of all drug possession. So, yeah, man, let's go down the list. So let's start with the federal murder law. What is it, and why should it be removed? Because I didn't know what it was until you told me.
The felony murder law, or felony murder rules, depending on what state you're in, they kind of have their own vernacular. Essentially, what it boils down to is if you are in commission of in the act of a felony, if you're committing a felony, and somebody dies as a result of that felony, or while you commit that felony, one way or another, somebody ends up losing their life. The person committing the felony can be charged, who participated in committing the felony can be any persons who participated in committing the felony can be charged with full-blown murder.
Yeah.
Full-blown homicide. And the circumstances can vary widely. You can be a getaway driver in a bank robbery, and you could be following all the traffic laws, and somebody could T-bone your getaway car, and somebody in your car could die. Somebody in the car, somebody literally can run a red light and T-bone you, and they die. And you can be charged with murder, homicide in that case. And the vast majority of the states.
Because you
robbed a bank, you were getting away in your getaway car. Regardless of if you ran the red light or if you were speeding, none of that matters. You are you're in the process of committing a felony. Now the felony murder rule applies, and you are thus responsible for that person's death. And it can be, and has been, as loosely interpreted as that example I gave you, which is something that happened in 2006 in Ohio. Where that's exactly what happened. Somebody robbed a bank. They were following all the traffic laws when they got away, and somebody T-boned them, and the person who T-boned them ran a red light and died, and that man was charged with murder. He did something wrong. He robbed a bank. Yes, that is wrong, right, objectively.
But he had no intention of killing anyone.
None. And in fact, the gun that he used to rob the bank was an airsoft gun that he spray painted black. He didn't even have a gun. You know what I mean? He had no intention of harming anybody. He was a man who, for one reason or another, was, he wanted to get a lot of money really quick. And whether, he had a good reason for it, I don't know. No one knows. I mean, irrelevant almost, right? And that has nothing to do with this person who ran a red light and lost their life tragically. It has nothing to do with this man, but he went to prison. He went to prison for that, and he ended up doing like 12 years or something like that. And he got out just a year and a half ago or 2 years ago.
That's all right.
Dog. Go down. Sorry.
Yeah, I jumped on YouTube and saw a little video about it, explaining it was animated, and it was like 3 minutes long. And the example that they gave was two guys go in to rob a bank. The police officer or the security guard shoots one of the robbers, kills him. The other robber that remains, there were two, now is charged with murder.
Yep.
Yeah.
That happens every day, actually, all the time. That's the most common implementation of the felony murder rule.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that the police kill somebody who's committing a felony, and the other people who are left, the survivors, they go to prison for murder, and they get charged with full-blown homicide as a result.
So what do you think the reasoning is behind that, man?
I think that as much as I hate to say it, I think that the intention behind this one was probably good.
Yeah.
As much as I really hate to give the system even a little bit of credit, I think the intention behind it was probably, it's probably well intended, right? Is the idea of like, look, if you're robbing a bank and you're speeding and you run the red light and kill somebody, you should get, that's not vehicular manslaughter, that's murder, right? Or, if you rob a bank and the police come, they're shooting at you and you're shooting back at them, and somebody gets caught in the crossfire, right? But the police hit somebody, right, and that person dies. Yeah, you should be maybe responsible for that, maybe, right? Yeah. But I think it's the fact that it's been implemented in such goofy ways over the years. It's basically like the way it tends to be implemented is a way to punish the way it's implemented the most often is as a way to punish the survivors, the people who don't get killed by the police during this felony exchange of fire or whatever.
Yeah.
Like in that example with the bank robber, right? It's a way to punish them. Take the dead guy's punishment and add it on top. You know what I mean? It seems like a way to be like, well, we can't punish that guy because we killed him, so we're gonna punish you harder.
Right.
You can get the death penalty in some states on the felony murder charge. And I don't think it's actually ever happened, but you can, and you can serve your whole entire life. That just terrifies me, that you can get caught up in, some amount of criminality and somebody dies as a result and you lose your life. And of course, when you commit crimes, you're weighing, right? Oh, the reward is here. The risk is that I'm going to spend some amount of time in prison. You never imagine that you could spend your entire life for one bank robbery where you never even had a gun, no ability to hurt or harm anybody. Just give me the fucking money, right? Yeah. You kind of weigh that. You're like, I need the money for whatever reason, or I want the money. Maybe it's lust, maybe it's a need, who knows?
Right.
And you say, I'm willing to risk that 10 years. I've never robbed a bank before. I'm willing to do 7 years in prison. I didn't even have a gun, so it's not like a crazy armed robbery. And then somebody dies as a result in some kind of, very sort of happenstance, by happenstance, you lose your entire life. That's
So the federal murder law. I mean, what do you have any idea? What is the kind of the average sentence? If you're charged and found guilty of that law.
It's like an abstract almost, and it's implemented differently in every state as well. So it is something I think would be hard to
you have to assume that it's considerable.
You're charging them with murder. It's not a different charge. It's not a different thing. That is the clear distinction to make here. They do have a different name for it, the rule behind it. That's why it's not called a law. It's called the Felony Murder Rule, because it's not a separate and different law, but it's a rule that allows you to implement the law in this specific case, in these cases.
Yeah.
Right. So you are charging that person with a full-blown homicide. That is what is most sickening about this. They are being charged in a way that's indistinguishable from somebody who actually pulls a trigger on somebody.
Yeah.
And that makes no sense to me. Again, it's one of those things that seems to be without sense, without logic.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. Hey, man. So just real quick, so we can kind of get through everything. Just real quickly, what are mandatory minimums?
Mandatory minimums are, it's almost self-explanatory, right? There's a minimum sentencing that is mandatory for certain crimes, or if you commit crimes a certain amount of times, right? Okay. Depending on state to state. So that can be, drug possession or drug distribution. If you've done it a certain number of times, there's a minimum, right? Yeah. Like a 3 strikes rule kind of thing, right. Which is.
So how is that flawed? How is that flawed to have a mandatory minimum, in your opinion?
Well, the system is not designed to rehabilitate or to change behavior in any way. It's designed to punish people, right? Just in general. Before you even take mandatory minimums into consideration, right? What is the actual prison system designed to do? What does it do? How does it do it, right? It doesn't, yes, they have these bullshit classes you take before you can get out of jail. You gotta, do your little bubbles, fill in your bubbles and write a little paper or whatever, write a little paragraph. It's a joke. It's in grade school level nonsense, right? They really make no considerable effort to change the behavior and of people who are in jail to prevent them from going back to the same patterns that got them in jail in the first place. So if you think about the fact that systems designed that way, just flat out, right? If you take it at its base, a system is designed instead of to make people better or to solve problems, to serve as a punishment for doing a bad thing, yeah. Right? Now you want to say that even though the thing that you've done isn't any more bad than the first time or the second time, that it has to carry at minimum, harder sentencing or harsher punishment, right? Yeah. Where again, they will really receive and be given no effort. There will be no effort given to change that behavior. You're just going to make them into more hardened criminals by the nature of the system, because of how harsh the living conditions are in prison. It's created a culture of hardened, gangsters. Yeah. The prison conditions are so terrible that the only way to actually maintain order and any kind of sense of order and civilness in prison is through intimidation tactics, right? And these like weird code of ethics, essentially, that only applies in places like prison.
So let me ask you something just real quick. So just kind of playing devil's advocate, I guess here.
Sure.
Yeah. So the mandatory minimums. Now, I mean, are they in place as a deterrent? If because you had said earlier, the second or third time of doing that same crime, if you know that, hey, number 3, if I do it again, man, I'm gone. Is that maybe kind of the reasoning behind a law like that?
Well, it's like I said, whenever we talked about that and and I said, I understand the need for something like this. And then I also kind of went and added a caveat to it of not that the system is designed to change the behavior that leads to these repeat, this repeat criminality, this recidivism, if you will. Yeah. And then I just kept going, but I guess that's what I'll get to now is that if you design a system that is made not to change behavior, but to punish people, then how can, and not only that, but the way that the way that you've designed the system to punish, not just the system punishes as a design, but the actual way the prisons work and the conditions that they live in are designed to create more hardened criminals and to take people who are not necessarily as hard of criminals and turn them into a more hardened warrior almost mentality, and then release them back into the public. You can't expect anything less than the same or worse behavior than what got them in there to begin with. So if you design the system that works in this way and then punish people who go through that system for ending up in this self-fulfilling prophecy that the system creates, that is, it's asinine. It doesn't make sense. It's
that makes sense to me. Yeah, you saying that and describing it in that way.
That's what I mean when I say an absolute from bottom up reformation, rethinking, paradigm shift of the system. We absolutely need to tear the prison system down to nothing and rebuild it conceptually from scratch using modern techniques, modern rehabilitation techniques. We need to have a system that changes behavior at its core and gets down at a deep level with individuals through therapy and psychiatric analysis to.
So how does that happen, man? How does that happen?
It's almost insurmountable an insurmountable challenge. There's not a real simple, cherry on top solution here. It literally is the only way is to do what I just proposed, is to tear the entire system down and rebuild it from scratch in the modern day, and to absolutely leave nothing behind the old system and to just completely start over. Of course, I'm talking, build the system in theory, where our lawmakers essentially would get together with experts and say, we're designing a new prison system. It's going to go into place in 2026. We're going to spend the next 2 years figuring out how to unfuck this situation, because we fucked it all up for about 150 years.
Yeah.
And that is what it takes. There's nothing short of that. These small changes over time will never lead to, because at the end of the day, they still all work on the same principle concept that it hasn't been working for over a century. So you need to build a new foundation for criminal justice in this country. That's the only way to solve these inherent problems with the system. The system is it's unfuckable, in my opinion. It's unfuckable. It really is. It is a cluster. It's a cluster if you've ever seen one. Yeah. Every aspect of the system is designed in an asinine way, at best, at worst, and nefarious, and designed nefariously to harm specific groups and with specific nefarious goals in mind, to suppress voting or community activism, etc. It's a mess. Every corner of it that you look at, there is no corner clean of cobwebs, if you will. I implore you to try and find a redeemable factor. We're doing it badly. It's very expensive. Also, our system is terribly, terribly expensive and wasteful. And we're just putting so many people in jail. It's impossible to even imagine the millions of people we have in jail. We're not even close to the largest country on this planet, population-wise.
Yeah.
I want to say we're in the top 15. Maybe we're in the top 10. Might be in the top 10, barely. But we easily, by a wide margin, have the most imprisoned people. And that is including adjusted Chinese numbers, where they are imprisoning the entire Uyghur population in Western China. The Chinese Uyghur Muslims. Well, they're not Chinese, they're Uyghurs, but China has essentially overtaken that section of Asia. And they've essentially imprisoned them in these, re-education camps, etc. Hundreds of thousands. And those aren't officially reported as imprisoned people by the Chinese, but even once you adjust the Chinese numbers to include those people and people in all political re-education camps in China, we still dwarf them by over 1 million people incarcerated. Really? Yeah, and that's people that were like justifiably throwing in jail, quote, air quotes, justifiably. Yeah. Somehow Chinese have decided to subjugate an entire group of people, and it still pales in comparison. And it's a joke. We have almost as many people as Jews were exterminated in the Holocaust in prison, and if you count county and city jails today in this country, we have nearly the same amount of people that were exterminated, the same amount of people as the Nazis exterminated, as the Jews, the Nazis, almost 6 million people is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I fumbled that whole sentence up. Yeah. Which is, that's mind-boggling. That's mind-boggling.
So right now we do?
Yeah, if you count city jails, county jails, state jails, not just people in prison, but people in city, county, and etc. At any point in time, we have almost 5 million, somewhere between 4.5 to 5.5 million people imprisoned in this country, whether it be a short or long-term imprisonment. Yeah. It's hard to say.
Hey man, let's move on to full decriminalization of all drug possession.
Sure.
So yeah, man.
I'm gonna flip the tables on you. Okay. Because I can tell you're a bit skeptical on this one.
On the full.
Yes.
Yeah. No. I
No,
think
you're
what you're reading
no.
is, yeah, I think what you're reading here
The
is,
sarcasm of society, I guess, that you're.
well, no, I think, you know, there's probably going to be some people that watch this and go, man, that's crazy. No, I mean,
Yeah.
we're going to make all drugs legal, you
Yes.
know, and, you know, and there is a negative stigma around, in my opinion, certain drugs that are actually less harmful than tobacco and alcohol that
Sure.
are
Yeah.
legal.
No, I want crack cocaine to be totally legal. You should be able to buy it without fear, with impunity. You should be able to buy it without fear of any, and use it without fear of any repercussion by the government, in my opinion. Crack cocaine, heroin, PCP,
Yeah.
methamphetamines. I'm talking literal full drug decriminalization.
Okay. Well,
The
yeah.
people who produce these drugs is another question altogether, right? Or to traffic large, huge quantities of them. But
why do you
I
think, you know, drugs that are, you know, by most considered, you know, really heavy, dangerous type drugs like crack cocaine or meth?
Sure.
Yeah.
They are dangerous.
Yeah. So why do you think they should be legalized? What is a,
It's
what
not
is
the government's fucking business. That's why. If you're a grown adult, who the fuck is the government or the police to tell you what you're going to put in your body? They don't stop you from smoking cigarettes or drinking yourself into a fucking coma or into a dead liver, right? There's no law stopping you from chugging bottles of whiskey until your liver shrivels up and you die, right? I mean, or, you know, there's no law stopping you from, you know, chugging a bottle of whiskey, and then the law only stops you once you get behind the wheel of the car and kill some kid. And I think that the law should apply the same way to illegal drugs. You know, if you're smoking crack in your house or meth in your house, and if you're smoking meth in your house and tearing apart computers and rebuilding computers, and then geeking out a bit and you know, and kind of going off on a rambling thing, calling your relatives at 4 a.m, telling them about all this money you found in a box in your closet that doesn't exist. That's harmless. It's relatively harmless, except for yourself. I mean, it's not any more harmful than drinking yourself into a stupor, calling your ex and making a fool of yourself. You know what I mean? And it shouldn't be any less concerning if somebody calls you so drunk they're crying and freaking out and having an episode. You should be concerned about them, right? And the same in this case, right? You should be concerned about how they're treating their body. But you should, if anything, refer that person to treatment to get help they need in some kind of 12-step or any other program that helps those people, not refer them to a jail cell. These people are oftentimes victim of a disease, of a clinical medical disease that is addiction. And they're not criminals. Nothing they have done. They have not done anything in criminality other than violate the black and white paper that you wrote that said it was illegal. They haven't done anything actually criminal. They've done nothing to hurt anybody. They've done nothing to hurt society when they do this. Most times they are victims themselves. Instead, we treat them as, you know, instead of as a victim, as a perpetrator of a heinous act. And that is why we should decriminalize possession and use of every single drug. It's not the government's business what you do with it. Now, of course, if you decide to smoke a bunch of meth and stab somebody, that's a crime. Meth or not, right? And making meth illegal obviously isn't stopping people in Florida from eating somebody's face off when they're high on meth, right? I mean, we read articles about this shit every day.
Right.
It's not stopping a guy from shooting heroin into his arm, which is a whole other thing, because the heroin epidemic was caused by leniency in the U.S. government and the pharmaceutical companies that pushed OxyContin on people, and the police that turned a blind eye and let the OxyContin pill farms stay open 24 hours a day, giving out pill scripts at 4 a.m. That's a real fucking thing that happened forever. They just recently, in the last 5 years, stopped letting that happen. You used to literally be able to go to a doctor at 4 a.m. There'd be a clinic. There'd be a line wrapped outside the clinic of people going in and getting an OxyContin script at 4 a.m. It's, you know, and it's, you know.
Is that doctor still open, man?
I'll hit you
You
up,
got the
man, after
address?
that. Hit me up after the. No, yeah, I mean, you know what I mean. It's the government allowed people negligently to get completely hooked and addicted to narcotics. Have you ever taken a Vicodin or a painkiller like that?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, you feel really fucking good on Vicodin. No, I mean, if we can be honest for just a second, I know it's a little bit taboo. Oh no, he enjoyed being on drugs. I was in a bad car accident in 2014. I had multiple back surgeries, L4-5 fusion. I have a scar about this long on my lower back, and I took I took 10-325 hydrocodone for 3 months after my surgery, as prescribed. I took it once every 4 hours, sometimes less. I took about 3 a day, 3 or 4 a day while I was awake, right? Which, you know, it was just what the bottle said. I had no experience with this. I've never done Vicodin for fun. I was pretty innocent to it at the time. I felt great. I felt great. I was so euphoric. I was so happy. I wanted to enjoy life to the fullest when I was on it. I felt like a better person. I felt like I liked myself more when I was on it. And then it was time to get off.
Yeah.
And after just 3 months of being on this medicine, taking it as prescribed by the doctor, I was violently ill with withdrawal symptoms for 2 days. I couldn't sleep. I was in aches and pains all over my body. I couldn't barely think. Like, I was just so lethargic that I could barely move or think. I was irritable, and it felt like I had the flu almost for 3 days. And it was so bad that I just wanted to go back to the doctor and have him give me more so I'd feel better. Yeah. I was taking it as prescribed. You know what I mean? And that was hydrocodone. Now, that was after, you know, they stopped giving out Oxycontin, like candy, and the miracle drug they said it was. I don't know if you remember the commercials and stuff. Oxycontin was this miracle drug that was supposed to time release the painkiller, right? Once they got in your system, it was supposed to time release it to where it wouldn't be addictive, where it relieved all the pain, and people who had all these pain symptoms, and it all just melted away, and it was non-addictive. They billed it as that. It was one of the most addictive things ever released to the public legally in the modern history of this country.
Really?
And I actually watched a documentary. I cannot remember the name of it for the life of me. I watched a documentary on either Netflix or Hulu a couple of years ago about this issue, about heroin and painkiller addiction. And the number one victim of this are our veterans, actually. You know, they come back from war or even just deployments, just the way that they have to wear their sacks, their hump sacks, hump racks, and things like that, whatever you call it. You know, hundreds of pounds on their back. It's very inefficient. A lot of times the straps are broken. They tell you, suck it up, suck it the fuck up, come on, grunt. You know what I mean? And you end up with a real tore up back, a real tore up body afterwards, and you end up on painkillers. And that's for people who didn't even go to war. When you go to war and you have traumatic physical injuries, you end up on painkillers for the rest of your life. And they followed this, and they followed a bunch of people in this documentary where they basically, you know, tried to an expose into the life of people who had to take these painkillers. And very unexpectedly, during the middle of shooting this documentary, the Congress had gone back and had gone in and changed the law on the availability of these drugs, right? Like they made it really difficult to get these painkillers, all right, because the abuse was rampant with the 24-hour pill farms, etc. And that happened during the middle of shooting this documentary. What this actually led to something very incredible, and I'll get the name of the film so I can send it to you so you can watch it. One of the people that they followed was this 65-something-year-old man who, you know, he was a veteran from the Vietnam War. He went when he was like 17. You know, he was almost a 70-year-old man, and he'd been on painkillers for 20 years almost, since the 90s. Wow. And they changed this law, and the VA refused to give out these painkillers anymore. These were like for, essentially, as far as the VA was concerned, post-op surgery level prescription medications, et cetera, not for daily treatment of pain. And all they offered him was like Tylenol 3 or something like that. And you can see like the life drain out of this man 1 or 2 days after not having any painkiller. I mean, his whole body just fell, he like withered away, and he was sick, man. It was really sad. And then it kind of, they're trying to interview him, but the man, he's like not even there almost. He's not even present, because this has taken everything from him. It's taken his mind from him. It's taken his body from him. And the only thing keeping him going and producing the energy needed to function and survive was this medication, because the physical dependency had become so strong over long-term use. And so they're interviewing him. They're trying to interview him. It's his last interview. And he can't even answer the questions because it's just he's not there. And he was so coherent and normal before. You would not have even guessed he was on painkillers. And it cuts from there to the director getting, in his hotel bed or whatever. He's in his boxers. He's got a t-shirt on, and he turns the camera on, and he's sitting there at the desk. And he's like, I just got a phone call that, I don't know the guy's name. We'll use John. John, he committed suicide last night. He shot himself in the head.
Yeah. And
he actually wrote a note, and his note said something basically along the lines of, I'm not going to watch my family. I'm not going to let my family watch me go down a path of criminality. And the only way I can imagine the only way I can imagine living life is, at this point, to go out and get heroin or something. And I don't even know how to do that. And I wouldn't want my family to watch me become that kind of person anyway. So I decided to go ahead and put it all to rest here, and shot himself.
So that was 20 years of being on hydrocodone, right?
Or roughly. So something along those lines. That's tragic. I mean, he couldn't survive. He was like, I'm going to go do heroin. And the stigma of that, the social stigma of being a heroin addict, led this man to shoot himself in the head rather than let his family watch him become a heroin addict, because the stigma was so bad.
Yeah.
And that is, and the idea that we're going to throw people in jail who have nothing else to turn to except for either debilitating pain and physical addiction, because they've been on this drug for over a decade, prescribed legally by their doctors.
Yeah.
And then they're turning to the streets. And that's why you've seen a massive uptick in heroin addiction in the last 2-3 years, is because that law changed. So now, given it had to be done, right? It's one of those bad things that you have to do, like a lesser of two evils. You can't let them continue addicting and hooking an entire next generation of people.
Right.
You've got to put an end to it. But we're not going to sit here. We're not going to sit and pretend that we're also going to throw those people in jail when they use heroin. Like, you got to be kidding me. These people need help. They need treatment. Yeah. They don't need a jail cell. A jail cell isn't a solution for them.
Right.
And not only is it wasteful on our end, because it's just cheaper to put someone in rehab, right? It's objectively is. It costs $30,000 a month to house prisoners in county jail, which is where most small medium drug offenders go. $30,000 a month per person. Yeah. And it's just cheaper to put people into rehabs where they can work while they are after they've gotten a certain amount of treatment, et cetera. They can pay their way to a certain amount.
Yeah.
And they can become members of society instead of better criminals.
Yeah. And these are people that are, in prison or have been arrested just for drug possession, right? It's not necessarily, hey, they're on drugs and they went and did something crazy.
Drug-related, people who are in jail for what they define as drug-related convictions are not people who are high and then committed a crime. They would be labeled as being somebody who committed, like if you're high and you stab somebody, you're a violent offender, not a drug offender, right? But if you're just somebody who has drugs or is dealing drugs, et cetera, you're a drug offender. So anybody listed under that statistic, the majority of their crime or the crimes they were convicted for are drug specific offenses.
Yeah. Yeah. And
excuse me.
Yeah, man. And thank you for that. Because I hadn't really thought about it that way. So they're arrested, they're sent to prison for what? Episode 5.
Punishment. It's like I led back to you.
Yeah.
Punishment. It's all about this punishment. You went against this black and white thing we wrote down, and you must be punished. The system has and never has had any intention of rehabilitation of people who live a life of criminality, whether that is rehabilitation from drugs or lifestyle or behavioral issues. It is always always has and will continue to be about punishment. And I don't think that our government should serve as the parent of like a parental figure of adults. I don't believe that. I think that it should be a different relationship. And whenever you have action and punishment, as opposed to action and solution, problem and solution, problem and correction.
Yeah.
Right. That's when you have like more parental relationship of, spare the rod, spoil the child nonsense. That, it doesn't work with kids. Whooping kids' asses does not work. Science has proven this. And it's the same thing. We're literally doing the same thing. And it's asinine. Is how many different layers of, it's almost like we're living a real life rendition of an Onion article at this point. We know this doesn't work. Everyone knows. Only the most ignorant of people really believe that punishment is a deterrent to crime. Whenever you see that we literally have more people in prison than ever before, and than any other country, and yet you're going to say this works. Recidivism is as high as it's ever been. This works? No, it doesn't work. So you want to keep making worse criminals that have to move into your neighborhood whenever they get out of jail until they commit another crime because they didn't learn anything about their behavior?
Yeah.
That only serves to hurt you and me.
Yeah. Two things. One, episode 5, Donnie Dye, he said, there was no rehabilitation. He was, sentenced to, 7 years. He did 5 in federal prison. And he said, there's no rehabilitation that goes on in prison at all. And he said,
what they try to pass as rehabilitation is a joke.
Yeah. Rampant. He said, it's just, you dial up what you want, and by the weekend, you got it. Yeah.
You can see all this on prison TikTok.
Yeah.
You even heard of prison TikTok?
No, man.
Oh, man.
I do normal TikTok, man. So, I know.
No, there's a whole subculture of TikTok. It's prison TikTok. And it's not people talking about prison. It's prisoners with contraband cell phones making TikToks. And talking about life in prison while in a jail cell, wearing their like coveralls and everything.
Whoa. Man.
That's crazy, right? Yeah, I mean, it's thousands of videos of different prisoners. That some of them have millions of views, millions of likes. Yeah, man. I mean, you can get anything in prison. It's essentially just a lawless enclosure where it makes me laugh to even think about the prison system as something to take seriously, as something that works. That's a joke to me.
So let me give you a counter argument that maybe some of our guests might have on the decriminalization of drug possession. So, and I do agree, especially when you explain it that way. Hey, you're drinking alcohol, you get drunk in your house. What's really the difference between doing that and maybe, getting intoxicated on ecstasy or LSD or some of these other drugs? But where these drugs come from, especially, the meth and the coke, and, of course, you've got the cartels, you've got all the violence that goes on there. So, if you decriminalize drugs, right, then in some way, aren't you, turning a blind eye towards, the violence that goes on by the drug makers, those that are bringing the drugs over, that kind of thing. What are your thoughts on that? Because no one's harmed in the making of alcohol. No one's harmed in the making of tobacco. Sure. But the making of meth and coke.
That's kind of a common sense thing, right? I mean, obviously, we're facilitating that violence via prohibition. Just like we created the mobs and gangs during alcohol the prohibition of alcohol inadvertently created that industry of mobster and gangster. We made Al Capone the richest man on the planet.
Yeah.
Via prohibition. Not that we made it directly, but we created the opportunity for men like Al Capone to become billionaires, multi-billionaires. And I think that, it's almost exhausting, really. I mean, we literally did the same song and dance with alcohol 80 years ago, 90 years ago, 100 years ago now, almost. Wow, it really has almost been 100 years since the alcohol prohibition. That's crazy. Time flies, huh?
Yeah, man.
And it is literally, as cliche as this is history repeating itself. I mean, the gangsters and mobsters of Al Capone's and the Al Capone era of gangsters and mobsters, completely facilitated by the prohibition of alcohol. They made all their money in that, and all that money created a need to defend territory and shipping routes and rivalries and violence. And it's the parallel of what we see on the border and in our communities today, not just necessarily in the border, but in the poorest of our communities in this country, where we see local gang violence. It's all facilitated by a need to protect territory and protect income, right? There's money to be made on that corner, and sometimes you gotta shoot somebody to keep that corner, to get that corner.
Yeah.
And if we just, it's simple as solving the violence created by the prohibition of alcohol. You just make it legal.
Yeah.
We've done this. We did this already once. Like, it's not like this is an abstract or a theory, right? Or maybe if we make it legal, we literally have lived this in our nation. So I just don't see how we could possibly continue to this facade of look at this lie or the shadows on the wall of the cave almost, to pretend like the reality isn't behind us. We're not even chained up. We can walk outside. I mean, it makes sense. It's not only makes sense in a theoretical way, but it's been proven.
Yeah. So you mean by the decriminalization of all drug possession, and I think I was confusing this. Just making drugs legal.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's stepping stones, right? Decriminalize it first, and then get people used to the idea of their neighbors doing crystal meth, and then you put it in stores. I'm serious.
Yeah.
It's a joke. It's funny, but it's not a joke. It is funny.
Yeah.
But I'm serious. I mean, you take baby steps. I mean, people aren't comfortable with this idea because they've been literally brainwashed by the government to believe that these are evil demon. The spirits are gonna go into your body. Let me. Have you seen Reefer Madness?
I've heard
you're gonna smoke some weed and they murder all your friends.
That's
real. Propaganda like that has existed.
Yeah.
Oh, if you take one hit of acid, you can enter a state of permanent psychosis where you're tripping for the rest of your life. It happens to one in every 1,000 people who do a hit of acid.
Right.
Where you trip forever. Now you're in a mental institution. That's a myth that has never happened to anyone ever. And I know people who have taken entire vials of acid on accident and have tripped for weeks straight. My little brother was in a state of psychosis for 2 months.
What?
He was selling acid, and he was a lot better at doing acid than selling acid. And he was doing a dozen hits a day almost, man.
Wow.
And finally, when he came off of it, he was in a perma trip for about 3 or 4 months. We thought we were going to have to lock him up. I'm going to be honest with you, we were really sure we were going to have to lock him up.
Yeah.
He would call my mom, and he would be like, dad, did you know Dad was running a cartel? Why didn't you tell me Dad was one of the heads of the cartel?
Yeah.
And all this crazy shit that made no sense. He's like literally living in a fantasy land on no drugs, just on this perma-fried thing. And that was on 1,000 hits over the course of a few months. And there's not a single case study of a person taking acid one time and being stuck in a mental institution, but that is a real legitimate old wives' tale myth. Fear.
Or dying. as far as as far as I know, or
if you take even one pill one time,
yeah.
it's all it takes, and then you could just die. Sometimes it's a risk that people take when they do drugs, even a little amount. Sometimes people just die.
Yeah.
It's not something that happens. I mean,
Let me
yes,
share this
die
with
on
you, man.
drugs. But
And I know you'll appreciate it. So I read about this guy, David Nutt. I read about him in a book I was reading. And in 2008, Professor David Nutt was appointed the chairman of the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs for the UK. And he was most well known for a controversial lecture he gave in July of 2009, where he discussed the government's attitude towards drugs versus their actual statistical harm. So, basically what the government is saying, hey,
yes,
this is really bad for you versus, well, how bad is it? And it was based on scientific measure. Okay. It was then published as a pamphlet, which is what later got Mr. Nutt into trouble. So according to what Mr. Nutt called the 9 parameters of harm, which included physical harm, social harm, and dependence, tobacco and alcohol ranked higher. They were more harmful in his study, in his scientific study. They were more harmful than cannabis, LSD, and ecstasy. And
you don't need to look any farther than you don't need to go any farther than ask someone who's done either marijuana, LSD, or ecstasy to find that out.
Yeah.
What a revelation, right? All you had to do is do those drugs to know that they aren't as bad as cigarettes for you physically. It's obvious. It's
right.
Common sense almost, and it's absurd to think that we live in a society where that is the common knowledge, if you will. That is like the point you have to prove. You have to prove to somebody that weed is less harmful than cigarettes. It's mind-boggling to me. It just I don't know about you, but I've done my fair share of each of those. I'm a bit of a psychonaut, if you will.
Yeah. So when wind of this got out, like I said earlier, Mr. Hill was relieved of his role by the then Home Secretary Alan Johnson. The reason Mr. Johnson gave was, and I quote, he was asked to go because he cannot be both a government advisor and a campaigner against government policy. So I interpret that as, regardless of the scientific evidence, if your message doesn't agree with our message, we want you out, and again, society considers tobacco and alcohol, hey, they're fine. They're legal,
Yeah, that's all that matters, man. The black and white's on your side here, brother.
Right.
Smoke it up, drink it up, drink yourself stupid, party, man. Let's go.
Yeah.
Spring break, woo! A whole culture. Go to college, get drunk every day. There's an entire culture built around this self-destructive ideology and the idea that hitting a fat bong rip in the morning is somehow degeneracy.
Yeah.
But the idea of instead of doing my midterm, I stayed up all night, fucking pounded Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Right.
Raped a girl. Like that's like supposed to be like the society that we're supposed to like, oh man, I wish that was my college experience.
Yeah.
Like it's an entire propaganda, like a propaganda campaign essentially at this point. And I think everyone's pretty tired of it. I really don't think that many people are falling for this anymore. I'm pretty sure most people are awake to these. Most people are awake to these concepts. But the problem is that most of your politicians have been in office for decades.
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi has been in office since the early 1990s. You know what I mean? In Congress. Same with Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer Chuck Schumer. All these guys, they've been in office for 20, 30, 40 years even. Bernie Sanders has been in office since the 80s. He's always held public office for his whole entire life, basically. And the idea that these are the people who are supposed to enact some kind of, are supposed to be aware of societal changes, right?
Yeah.
I don't subscribe to that. We need to that's a big problem. Term limits on all of these congressmen and senators. It's crazy. You shouldn't be able to make a career out of this.
Yeah.
Get on out of there, let somebody fresh come in, and that's how you get a system to evolve and change over time. That's the only way, right? Is fresh blood. If you have old blood whose only interest is to maintain in power, you end up being subject to all kind of different nefarious lobbying agreements and stuff, which is also the most absurd system I've ever seen in my life. This whole entire country runs on absurd, non-logical, nefarious systems, and it's everywhere you turn. It's really sick.
Well, hey man, let's wrap up here. We've been running for almost 2 hours.
My wife and kid just
which is awesome, man. Which is awesome. Yeah, and so hey man, what is up next for Dusty Mesa Productions? You guys working on it?
Who knows? It's up to you guys, I guess. The viewers out there, the people who enjoy our content. We've got quite a few different creatives and we're working on a few different creative concepts right now, and a few different projects, but none of them are ever going to get off the ground if you don't go and watch a Prisoner song on Vimeo. Yeah. So that's the first way. If you guys want to see more content like that, then just support the content that already exists, and just make sure that you're putting your viewership where you want it to be seen. And if that happens, then we'll be back sooner rather than later, and hopefully with a project that is equally as stunning and profound.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
That's all we can hope for. Whatever the viewers want. They want more. They want more Dusty Mesa. They'll get it.
Yeah. Well, man, I appreciate you guys.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I think filmmakers like you, Bilal, and your partners there. I think I see you guys as the great teachers of our time. I really do. Wow. So I want to keep.
That's flattering, really.
Yeah, man.
Quite flattering.
I want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, keep digging, keep uncovering, and keep telling the story, brother.
Absolutely. I promise. Right, man? Nothing less than the absolute cold hard truth.
Man, yep. And I believe you, man. Because you've been throwing down some truths here, man.
It's no sugarcoating it, man. You just got to look at it, call them like you see them, right? All right, brother. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you, man. All right. We'll see you.